And after that, queen to d2 by Carlsen. And now you can see in the next move, white is preparing to push this e-pawn further, creating a discover attack on this knight. So to defend this, here Ding goes for d5. And clearly you can see his intention. And after that, here Carlsen decides to bring his bishop to h6, asking for a bishop exchange so that he can place his queen to h6. Okay, so now Carlsen goes for g4. He wants to bring this knight to g3. Okay, so now it's important for white to bring this queen to h4. This is because in the next move, black can go for f4 with the idea of pushing f6 in the future, so that black can also activate his knight. So bringing this queen to h4 will stop the move queen to f4. And that would be better for white. But instead, here Carlsen decides to bring back his knight to f1. And as I said, now black can go for queen to f4 with the idea of f6 or maybe knight to f6, taking advantage of this spin. But Ding missed that move and instead he brought back his bishop to c8. Maybe he wants to place this bishop to e6 for better range. And after that, knight to d6 by Ding, preparing for knight d5, which attacks this g3 pawn. And to stop this, the best move for white is to just push this g pawn further. But instead, Carlsen decides to bring his king to f2, bringing this king into the game, which is also good. And after that, here Ding decides to go for knight to f5, preparing for knight to e3, which targets this c2 pawn. And there are now multiple ways to tackle this, either pushing the pawn to c3 or maybe to c4. But Carlsen goes for knight to f1. Okay, so as you can see, now black can go for king to g5 with the idea of king to h4, attacking this isolated pawn on h3, which is a very crucial pawn for white. So to stop this, here white can simply push his pawn to h4. And let's suppose if game continues like knight to f5, which attacks this isolated pawn on h4, but white can easily counters with by bishop to f3, attacking this h5 pawn. And now there are multiple options for black to continue this game, like king to g6 or simply bishop to f7, which guards the h5 pawn. But let's suppose if black decides to capture this h4 pawn by knight takes h4, simply bishop takes h5, king to g5, attacking this bishop, simply bishop goes back to e2. And if king to f4, knight to e4. And you can see now no side can progress from here, because if white tries to capture the queenside pawns, as you can see, the bishop on e6 is taking care of everything. Okay, so in the actual game, after this move, here Carlsen goes for king to g3. And the problem with that move is now black can instantly give a check from f5 square by knight to f5 check. And suppose and king to f4, and then he can bring his knight further to e3, which is a very good outpost for this knight, attacking this bishop as well as this pawn. And now Carlsen goes for bishop to f3, and here it's better for him to capture this pawn on c2 by knight takes c2. And let's suppose if bishop takes h5, simply bishop takes h3, and clearly you can see this king will later run through these squares and this position will be completely winning for black. But in the actual game, after the move bishop to f3, after this move, here Ding missed that move and he goes for h4. And now knight to f2 is important for white. Okay, because if black goes for suppose knight takes c2, now comes king to g5, and clearly you can see now no one can guard this pawn. But in the actual game, after king to e7, here Carlsen made a mistake by knight to g5, and that's a mistake because now clearly you can see after knight takes c2, now white can't access the h4 pawn again, which is very important because that's how white could promote his own h pawn. And after that, here Carlsen tries to run through h4 pawn by. But that's a mistake because now Ding finds the best move king to e5, and if white captured on h4, now this position would be completely winning for black due to king to f4, king to e3, king takes d3, and you can see now it would completely over for white. And Carlsen decides to, yeah, so basically here Carlsen decides to capture on h4, and he got trapped by Ding idea. And here the move c4 is completely winning for white, which trying to deflect this d pawn so that black cannot promote his own c pawn. But here Ding goes for knight to e1, attacking this d3 pawn, and Carlsen defends it by. And now it's better to capture this b2 pawn so that black can push his d pawn. Let's suppose if knight takes b2, yes, white can push h5, but simply c4, h6, c3, h7, c2, h8 equal to queen, c1 equal to queen. And now both sides have a queen, but let's suppose if queen to e5 check, simply king to f3 discover check by this queen, and if king to g6, queen to e3, and you can see this position is winning for black due to having two extra pawns, and there's nothing that white can do. But in the actual game, after the move h4, here Ding goes for knight to f4. And now it's better to bring this king to e3 so that he can support this entire pawn chain. But instead he goes for king to g3. And now white have to just find the move bishop to e8 to save this game. And let's suppose if d3, simply king to e4. If d2, bishop to a4, and now you can see white has successfully stopped this pawn from promotion, and obviously black can't move his king to f2 due to the undefended knight, and by this you can see this game is completely equal for both. But Carlsen also missed that move, and after king to g3 he goes for bishop to b5. And in this position, the final move by Ding is d1 equal to queen, and in this position Magnus Carlsen resigned, because clearly you can see after bishop takes d1 check, simply king takes d1 and black will slowly grab these all pawns and promote his own pawns. What an amazing game by Ding. This is your host Bison signing off. Bye bye.